Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
I see some heads shaking. So it took me a second to get dialed in. For some reason, I was having issues, but I'll go ahead and get started. So I apologize for being a couple of minutes late. I know we only have 2 hours, and by 2 hours, I know that seems like it might be a lot of time, but I really don't think it is. I really appreciate everybody sending in the questions that you did. There was a lot of really good things that we're going to talk about today. I know we're not going to get through them all. That's going to be the hard part about only having 2 hours, is there's more than 2 hours worth of questions and answers, and I want this to be interactive. I don't want it to be a presentation. So I want you guys to speak up, share your thoughts, and let's talk through some of this stuff. What I will commit to you is whatever questions we don't get answered on the call, whatever follow-ups we don't get answered, we're going to put a document together to answer those questions and give you our thoughts and send that out to you probably early next week. So if you could, to help us do that, we've got some people taking notes, but if you could help us by putting your questions in the chat. So you can ask them verbally as well, but please type your questions into the chat. That way we can save those chat questions and get back to everybody with the answers again early next week. We'll probably be referring back to, as we go through this, we'll probably be referring back to some of the previous recorded webinars that we did, the job guidance document that was put together, some of the health and safety stuff that was put together. We have a page on the LMS. It's a COVID page that has all this information in it. It's all aggregated into one site. So you can go there and access these documents. You can go to the IUPAT COVID webpage and access a lot of those documents there. So when we refer back to those things, that's where you can find those. Those are already online. And that's also going to be where we're posting the answers to these questions. We'll create like a frequently asked questions document, and you'll be able to access those there. So you'll all get it emailed directly to you, but then you'll also be able to go and get it online and reference it. And as we get new questions and things pop up, we'll be able to update those documents and make sure that you have the current versions as well. So again, that's where you're going to find those as LMS on the COVID link that you can click on the LMS. So what we're going to be talking about today is, as most of you I think are already aware, is this whole discussion about opening training centers, opening the offices, doing classes again, potentially in-person classes, and how we're going to manage that. And what we're doing is going to be different than what you're doing in each of your individual areas. What they do in the Northeast might be different than what they do in the Southeast or out in the West Coast. The most important thing, all the information that we're going to give you, the most important thing for you to keep in mind is this is not legal advice. We do have a couple of our attorneys on the phone to assist in answering some of the questions that might come up. But this is not legal advice. You need to speak with your local counsel, follow your local guidelines, local laws and regulations. This is just best practices. These are some recommendations that we're making. It's more practical advice. It is not legal advice. So please don't take anything that we say and go and do it, get jammed up, and then say, well, Anton and the FTI said this, or the legal team that FTI is working with told me to do it this way. You need to seek your own legal advice, work with your counsel, your business managers, your board of trustees to make sure that you guys are following all the local laws and regulations, make sure that's in line with what your trustees want you to be doing and head in that direction. So just to give you a quick update of what we've done here at FTI and what we've been doing to get ready to reopen. It looks like, unless there's a change with what's going on in Maryland and the governor makes some change, it looks like we're going to open up our offices in the middle of June. Probably around the 15th or 16th of June, we'll be reopening and people will be coming back into work. We'll be social distancing. We're going to do some work from home, as well as some reduced number of people in the office at any given time. So we're following some of those practices. We've had a work group that's been meeting for about a month and a half now, maybe close to 2 months. I'm kind of losing track of time the longer this has been going on. But we've had a work group that's been meeting to talk about health and safety issues, best practices, and how we can reopen safely and protect all of our employees from potentially contracting COVID. The other topic that we have to talk about is how we're going to reopen for students. When are we going to have people come back to Hanover and take in-person classes? We've had a lot of internal conversation. We've talked with the board, talked with the co-chairs of the GP, and it looks like a minimum of about 3 months after we open the office will be when we start having in-person classes again. So we're going to continue to do distance learning, continue to support you all via Zoom. We will probably have staff start traveling, real lightly at first, and potentially helping you all out in your local areas, but doing a lot of Zoom conference calls and a lot of assistance that way. And after about 3 months, we're going to take a look at reopening and starting to do classes here in Hanover. That's going to change. The way that we do things is going to be different than the way that we've done it in the past. And just like you all, we're working with our legal counsel. We're following state, local guidelines and regulations, and we're putting a plan together to make sure that we keep our employees safe, to make sure that we keep our students safe when you all and when your instructors come up to Hanover and take classes. So that's what we're doing. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about our plans just yet. I'll leave that up to Bernie to answer some of those questions. We can kind of talk through some of that stuff. Before we get started, the first thing I want to do is we've got a poll that was put together, and it should be coming up on your screen in just a minute here. And it's basically, how confident are you right now in reopening your training center with the current climate and current conditions? So are you 0%, not ready at all, 25%, you feel 25% ready, 50%, 75, or 100% ready? So how confident are you in getting your training center reopened? So if you could, go ahead and take the poll. We will take a look at all the results, and we'll compare those a little bit later. We're going to ask you a similar question, and just kind of see where we're at and if you got anything out of this. So I'll give you all a second to go through and answer the poll questions. So you probably have clicked on it already. If you haven't, I think it'll be up for another couple of seconds. I already clicked on mine, so it went away. So I'm not sure how long the poll will stay up. But what we'll do, in the interest of getting into the meat and potatoes of the conversation that we're going to have today, we've asked a couple of directors of trainings, one from each region, to talk about how you're going to open your training centers. What things have you considered? What plans have you put in place? And I guess I'll say right from the start, one of the most important things is that you have a written plan, that you don't just willy-nilly open up your training center. You have a written plan that's going to protect you in a lot of different ways. But what plans do you have in place? What steps have you already taken? Have you already opened, or are you getting ready to open? So we'll just go through the list. I'd like you to just spend a couple minutes talking about what you've done. Bernie will probably have some feedback and follow up on some things, maybe give you some ideas or some additional guidance of things that you might want to take a look at, and then we'll start getting into the questions. So the first one I'd like to call on Patty. I know you have volunteered to talk about what you guys are doing. So if you could kind of guide us through, what you've been up to and where you're at, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Anton. Actually, first thing I want to say before we even go down this road here, guys, is I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the Canadians up here when we say how concerned we are about what's going on down south right now and how we're all thinking about you guys. I mean, it's bad enough you've been dealing with this COVID-19 thing, but with the death of George Floyd, things have completely gone sideways down there. So we're thinking about every single one of you guys down there right now, eh? So, Anton, to get into the meat and potatoes of things here, I'm one of the guys that voted 100% confidence on opening our facility because we are opening. We're going to be doing it starting Monday. And I actually sent 3 documents off to Simon Hazelwood this morning here, and I'm sure he can probably forward to all you guys. So rather than me go through all of it here on this and take up time, if you guys would like, you can take the 3 documents I sent once Simon forwards them to you guys and have a look at them. Essentially what we did, we sent a letter out to the students in advance of their coming to school, laying out our expectations to protect their health and the health of the training staff here. Normally we run 16 individuals in a class, in each one of our classes, and we're going to be doing that with 8 students in a class, just as sort of baby steps to maintain safe social distancing. We've got a whole bunch of protocols we've got in place. Like I said, I don't want to go into all of them in detail. You can read that in the documents I've forwarded to Simon. But part of the reason why we're able to do that here is because we've been the benefactors of some pretty good leadership here on a provincial basis. And to be quite honest, some good luck on top of it as well. Some of the other areas of Canada didn't fare as well as us because their spring break for school actually happened ahead of us, and we were able to learn some of the lessons in some of the other provinces that happened and be able to apply those out here in BC. We didn't shut down to the extent that a lot of other places in Canada and across the states did. We're actually starting to reopen, and it looks like our provincial health officer, Bonnie Henry here, was making the right calls. She's terrific. She's got plenty of experience dealing with SARS outbreaks and Ebola outbreaks. She has fought these in the past, and so she had a wealth of experience. And we've been lucky too, because WorkSafe BC, which is our provincial health and safety outfit here and compensation outfit, they put together a lot of good information that we've been able to put into some of our plans here. One of the things that the provincial government also put together for us, so there's a COVID-19 assessment tool, which is essentially consists of 5 questions that they ask you to respond to. And if you answer yes to any one of them, you're probably not going to be participating in any one of our programs. So that is part of the document. You can take a look at that, like I said, when Simon forwards that to you guys. We are also going to be redoing this questionnaire on a weekly basis with each one of our students as they attend training to make sure that we're reinforcing the idea of safe social distancing, being aware of who you've been with on weekends when you're not at the facility, and that too, and taking those precautions forward for training. I'm pretty confident based on some experience we had out here already with some students. I don't know if you're aware, but when we had to shut down training here, we had 15 painting students that were in their final year of training waiting to write the red seal. In fact, they were four weeks into their training, and we decided to carry on with their training to make sure we could get them to write the red seal exam. And so we were able to learn some lessons just in getting that group through too. And we wound up eventually with about 13 kids that wound up sticking with us. One went home to his family on the island. One individual, unfortunately, started exhibiting flu-like symptoms, and we had to ask him to leave the class. So of the 13 individuals that we stayed with, 13 wound up being able to write the red seal exam, and 11 of those 13 passed. So kind of thought process we had to going into putting that document together and our plans here. I'd be more than happy to speak with you. So you've got my contact information, I'm sure, and it can be distributed to you guys. Feel free to give me a call. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. We didn't have to do a lot of modification to the facility itself because we've got a pretty good size facility. We've got about 40,000 square feet of space here, and we've actually got 3 natural separated areas where we're going to run a level 1 painting and decorating class, a level 2 glazing class, and a level 1 wall and ceiling installers class. Those 3 will be followed by a drywall finishing class. Like I said, only 8 students in a class. Separate areas. We've actually staggered the start dates. We've got the painter starting in the first week, the wall and ceiling guy starting in the second week, and the glazier starting in the third week. So we didn't have the entire group of 24 students here all at the same time. We're kind of spreading it out. And it's going to be a learning process. We hopefully, if this goes well, we may look to expanding from 8 students to 10 students with our next intake. But it's going to be a bit of an experiment, and our hope here is to have 0 cases of COVID as we go forward. Like I said, Anton, I don't want to take up too much of the time. I'll just let the documents I sent you to Simon do the speaking.
Patty, thank you. I appreciate that. It sounds like you guys went through a good process in developing a plan. I'm thrilled to hear it's a written plan. I'm excited to take a look at them and then ultimately share them. And I think that's, I appreciate you offering to share them with everybody. And I think that's one thing that we can all learn from each other. I know you've got some things that you've probably got in there that will be aha moments for other folks, us included. And I'm sure there's other people out there that put plans together that that will help us all as well. So I think it's good to share, and it's good to have that for everybody to be able to take a look at and why reinvent the wheel.
Anton, if anybody sees any holes in my plan, please let me know too, please, because I'm wide open. My ears are wide open in this thing. It's brand new for all of us, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
So thank you, Patty. Bernie, I don't know if you want to respond at all, or should we just go right into the next director training?
I think we just go right into the next director training because I liked a lot of the stuff that I just heard there. It sounds like you were forward thinking and leading into this because obviously it's not going anywhere, so we've got to react to it and prepare for it. So I'll just keep quiet until we're up.
Sounds good. Thank you. So next one, we'll go to the Central Region, Dan Penske Jr. Dan, if you could walk us through what you're doing in Chicago and how you guys are working things in your area.
Good afternoon, everybody. So just the rundown of how we got to where we're at and everything we did along the way. The way we started, we closed down Friday, March 13th. And it was probably only 2-3 weeks after that, we immediately started online classes. What we did was we broke down all of the students based on how many weeks they had left to complete their program. Everybody that was 10 weeks or less, looking out ahead, thinking, okay, some forward thinking, we might be in this more than 10 weeks. So we wanted to look at that group first, and we called them like our super seniors. Basically said, they're pretty far along. They've done most of their hands-on portion. We can put them straight away into student-led online. This way we can get our numbers down when we do reopen and get those kids pushed through the program. Here in Chicago, we're in a unique situation because we run a 3-year program. We have students every day for 8 hours. They'll come 1 day a week and they work 4 days out in the field. They end up their 3-year program here with 960 related instruction hours. So because of that, I knew I had a lot in my bank to really push out the related instruction. We got a correspondence with our DOL rep that said they were going to be a lot more lax on what they allowed through with the related instruction. So I knew we had some leeway there. Not everybody would have that, same freedom that we do if you're in a, a 576 program or a 432. But with 960 hours, we're about 400 hours that we can play with. So we really took advantage of the LMS to its full extent. So right off the bat, we got students immediately where the instructors, we created tracking sheets. I know a lot of people are familiar with Google Docs. We use Microsoft OneDrive, which we stumbled upon by accident. We use Outlook for our mail server. Just through my staff in the staff meetings that we were having weekly, someone figured out we could share documents, and we set up tracking sheets so that once we got our VPN and some of our remote access set up to our office, then each instructor created a tracking sheet, basically a roster, that as they completed their LMS work, it would go real time to the secretaries and they could give them their appropriate day, 8 hours. So what we did was we moved our classes. Then the second phase of our plan was the rest of the student body. We allowed them to work 5 days a week. And then what we did was we did the classes at night, 2 hours a night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, to get their 8 hours. And then we would put Friday down as their day. So as their progress was tracked through the sheets, When they got to 8 hours, then they would get their day. And we basically didn't allow much leniency. If you were logged into, and we did it varied, where we tried to make it as much of a virtual lesson as possible. We use Zoom as our format, but that was just to log in, get the kids engaged, take a roster, take attendance, and then it might be watching a video together, might be doing a PowerPoint, might be giving them an assignment to do for another hour and a half on the LMS. But if they weren't present for any one of those days, they did not get credit for that week. The other thing was we did not make this mandatory. But the fact that they were working 5 days a week, some of the technology hurdles that we had to overcome, there were still a lot of kids that were struggling, and we didn't dock them by giving them absences or marking them. We just, very clearly explained to them that this is a pause in your program. You're not going to make your raises, your levels. You're not going to, continue up through the program on your school portion if you don't take advantage. So looking at it more like a university type of landscape where, hey, you're not in the class, you're going to fail the exam. We're not going to hold your hand through this. We're getting ready to reopen. It was looking for a short while like our third phase of the plan was going to be a hybrid approach, similar to what Mr. Byrne was talking about there, where we were going to go half of the student body in for 4 hours and then the other half of the day, the other 4 hours. But because of the online portion and all of the work that we were able to do, we actually graduated quite a few apprentices through the program. And I say graduating loosely because obviously there's the school and the work portion, but a lot of the apprentices finished their school portion with us over the last 12 weeks, and that dropped our numbers because we've had our window closed for new applicants. So basically we're not taking any new applicants. The numbers went down. They got pretty manageable. We were at about 200 kids. Now we're probably at about 140, 150 with some of the unemployment and some of the graduating, and now spreading that out between 6 instructors. We're actually going to have classes that are no bigger than 4, 5, or 6 per class. The other thing that we're doing is we do a lot of outside projects in order to get the hands-on portion of the school taken care of. We've got projects with churches and schools and different entities around the city, and we're going to try to engage back with those, but we've staggered to have a project day, each instructor on a separate day, which keeps the numbers down even further and kids out of the building. So we plan on having only about 20 to 25 people in the building when we reopen on the 15th. And basically that's about half of what we would typically have in here. We'd have anywhere from 40, 45, or 50. The things that we're doing right now, I'm basically using a combination of what was provided from the FTI, CPWR, OSHA, everything, even our lawyers. But the CPWR reopening plan is really a nice boilerplate, I found, and we're plugging in everything, some of our customized stuff there. So the last pieces of the puzzle are just some signage, PPE, thermometers, forehead thermometers. We're also, something I identified here even prior to the pandemic was building a contained student lobby area. That was just for the security of the building. But we're gonna complete that project over the next 2 weeks so that we actually have a walled off area. It's a glass wall that the Glazers are doing for us so that we can keep them in a contained spot before they actually enter the building fully. So, that plan's being put together. I'm still finalizing it and plan on sharing that with Dan Hink when I get that completed. But that's kind of everything what we've done and are doing in a nutshell.
So sounds like you had some really good ideas of how to do the virtual learning. I like some of the things that you're doing as far as keeping people engaged and different ways to kind of change it up, doing a mix of LMS and Zoom and things like that. That sounds pretty cool. You might have done this already, but if you haven't considered that contained area, that apprentice lobby or or whatever that is, the ventilation issues that potentially could be in there, make sure you're taking that stuff into account. I'm sure Bernie will probably touch on that when we get into some of the Q&A, but if you're undergoing a redesign or renovation, now's the time to make some of those necessary changes to make sure that you're future proofing and keeping safe going forward. So, okay, I'll move on to Western Region, Dave Bertle. Dave, I think you've opened up already, if I'm not mistaken. Why don't you share with us what you've done, what things you took into consideration, and where you're at, if you don't mind?
Okay. Yes, Anton, we opened up for floor covering on the, well, let me backtrack. We closed on the 16th of March. Pretty much all of our training, with the exception of our trade show program. They was using at that time, the trade show was using the downtime to catch up on some of their training. Of course, none of us back in March expected this to last 10 plus weeks and for the trade show industry to completely, I guess, pretty much crumble or stop. So the trade show, they continued their training during that time. They caught up on everything. The rest of the crafts, they ceased training for not only apprenticeship training, but for journey person upgrade and safety courses. We opened up on the 18th of May for our floor covering program, which is a daytime training program, 40 hours a week. And the glazing program opened up just this last Monday on the 1st. Some of the things that we put in place was, one, we did an apprentice and journey person, kind of like a self-check sign off. So everybody that comes through the program, whether they're an apprenticeship class or they're coming in for a journey person upgrade or safety course, would go through the self-check list, kind of just goes through the symptoms, the basic symptoms of the COVID-19, and they sign off on it. What we are doing for all the apprentice classes is we're going through the, I believe the number is 195 course, the COVID course. Even though everybody's kind of been there, done that, I've heard it, from job site stuff, tailgate meetings, etc. We're going through that course with them. We spend about 55 minutes with them on the course, ask them if they got any questions, go through the PowerPoints from Bernie's PowerPoints from that course. I explained to them what our concerns are as a facility, not only for them, the students and the participants here, but also for the staff that's here, from the instructors all the way to the office. That it's not about us just protecting, ourselves as a fund or protecting the students. Is about protecting everybody. And they seem to get it. I know we had a class here this morning. It's their first time here. They're first stage apprentices. So it's their first time in this facility since all this went, the pandemic started, and they seem to understand that a little bit more because they've been involved in it for the last 10 weeks. But one of the other items that we did was we did a protocol for the facility. Kind of went through our cleaning regimen. We don't have, other than an evening and weekend cleaning crew, some of the stuff that has to happen during the daytime with daytime training, a lot of that stuff is performed by ourselves. It's something that the more people you get, the more labor intensive it gets because you have to start restricting space. We did restrict our restroom usage down to we shut off one of our restrooms completely and used a smaller restroom. It's a little bit easier to maintain that way versus I don't know, maybe a 7 or 8 stall system. Our classroom sizes for our daytime training, we split it up. So a maximum classroom would be 10 per classroom. That's about a third of what a normal classroom would hold. And then if you got guys in the shop area, then we'll have, the other half of the class out in the shop area. And what we're looking at, once our evening classes start for the new semester for our paint, our commercial paint and our industrial paint program is normally let's just say for an example, a Monday night class would be one class of 20 per instructor. It's going to be two classes of 10 with 2 instructors. So we're going to be increasing our instructor the amount of instructors that we normally would use here during the week. So we have to add, a lot of these instructors are part-time, they work during the day. So we've had some meetings with them to discuss what we need in order for us to continue and start the new semester. So we need their buy-in as well. And we need to know that they're comfortable with what we're doing here. And we're just trying to really just stay on top of on everything that we have to do, the social distancing, the office staff and how they interact with new applicants. We have documents that come in that are handled. They're not touched for about 24 hours. We don't have community coffee, which was a huge issue. Donuts, which was a common thing. You know, somebody always bring donuts. Community microwaves. Writing pens and pencils. We're asking the students to bring their stuff in, just like you would in normal. You'd be required to do a normal K through 12 program. So just the coffee, donuts, and the pen and pencil is a huge change for everybody for some oddball reason. But other than that, it's I don't know what I didn't. Like everybody, I think before me kind of mentioned, there was no real plan to this and how to get started. We kind of just looked around and picked stuff from OSHA and from CDC and from the World Health Organization and kind of pieced it all together and said, let's see if we can do this. And does anybody have any questions of anything that, or does anybody need to see anything that we put out? I'm more than happy to distribute that.
Dave, if you don't mind sharing it, I'd definitely appreciate it. I'd love to create a repository of different plans that people have that you all can access. I think the more access that we have to information and what people are doing, the better it's going to be for all of us to make good decisions. You said a couple of things that I really applaud you for. Making people feel comfortable and getting their buy-in, I think is extremely important. You know, if you have people that aren't comfortable coming back into work or students that aren't comfortable coming into class, I think that's going to be a huge issue. I like that you talked about protecting everybody. You know, I think that's really important. Health and safety is everyone's responsibility. Keeping everyone safe is important. You know, and even just simple things like your document policy, the pens and pencils, the microwaves, you know, a lot of that stuff is things that you might not ordinarily think about, but those are all, you know, potential places where there can be exposure. So I really applaud a lot of the steps that you're taking. I'm anxious to read your full plan, if you don't mind sharing it, and, you know, seeing where you're at. And, you know, I'm sure other people would love to get some of the, you know, take some of the things that you've done and implement them as well. So sounds really, really well done. I'm excited to take a look at it. Anybody have any questions for Dave, or Dave, you have anything else before we move on?
No, one thing that actually was the first, we didn't really have a lot of concerns with the students coming back. They kind of were welcoming coming back to class. I mean, some of them actually complained because they were already working on job sites with certain restrictions, and they didn't see why they couldn't come to school. But they, you know, you're talking about one craft over another, and we really wanted to treat everybody the same. And we weren't picking on one or the other, or saying, you know, this stage of apprentice over this stage of apprentice. But one thing that actually came up, started last night, is in the LA area, or Los Angeles and Southern California area, with all the you know, the protest, which some of those protests have turned into looting and civil disobedience going on. We had some students concerned about coming to class over that. And this came up late last night because there is some curfews in place. And actually, I just got asked right before you asked me to speak, was there's curfews in place that are in the evening, when if we have a safety class, it's supposed to be starting next Monday, what do you do about the curfew if the class starts at 5 and the curfew's at 6? So,
Wow.
you know, I mean, nobody's being pulled over right now, at least that I know of. I know we had a few people during about the 4th weekend of the start of the official, I guess you could say the official start of the pandemic. We had a few people getting pulled over in the morning on their way to work, and they had to explain that they were part of an essential workforce. So I don't know how to deal with that. Only thing I could do is like we did with the pandemic side of it is just say if you're not comfortable with being here for any reason, then just let us know, and we're not going to, like I think Patty said, you know, we're not holding. Actually, no, it was Dan. Dan said it, they weren't holding anything against anybody, penalizing them for not being able to attend. You know, of course, we're going to look into it. Like some of the calls I got last night. Of course, we were checking. Okay, if you don't want to come to class because you feel it's a safety issue because of the protest and civil disobedience, then I'm assuming that you wouldn't be going to work either. And so we never did get an answer on that. And actually, both of those two individuals did show up today. So.
Wow. Well, it's definitely uncharted territory for sure. And, you know, 2020 has become the gift that keeps on giving. You know, unfortunately, we're all learning to cope with all of this together, you know. The curfews and things like that, you know, the virus, even the protests and the demonstrations, and you know some of the issues that are going on there. You know, I saw a lot of those videos, and there's people wearing masks, and there's people running around that aren't. And I wonder if that's potential for spreading the virus. You know, I mean, there's so many different issues to consider right now, and you know, again, we're all in it together, and it's uncharted territory for all of us, and that's why. You know, Dave, I appreciate you sharing. I appreciate everybody jumping on the call and having this conversation, because it's, you know, I think we can all learn from one another. So, you know, Dave, thank you. I'll move us on to Eastern Region. And last time I looked up at the screen, Larry was wearing his PPE already. So, Larry, why don't you walk us through what you've been doing, how you've planned and prepped, and if you're talking, we can't hear you, so hit your unmute button so that you can unmute.
All right. Can you allow me to share my screen? I got a little short PowerPoint of what we did during our C7. We had the class kind of forced on us, and
I will leave that up to our tech experts, Donna or
is there a
Alice.
host that can allow that? If you can't, I'll just let it guide me and tell you what we did. But I thought it'd be kind of cool. Well, the host has me disabled, so I'm not going to worry about it. But we've been doing what everybody else is doing, where we could give our apprentices classes online. That's what we've done. We're going to reopen our classrooms in August, you know, for the fall. Start our block training early. After Labor Day, we'll do our regular nighttime trainings. But we had to reopen a little early because we had to have a C7 for a contractor where, you know, the Navy has a deadline down in Kings Bay. They want to get the job done. And they said, hey, we need more certified people in here. So we had no choice. And nobody really had a plan at the time. So we took guidance from ATR, Dan Pinsky, Nicole, SSPC, the COVID 195 class. We use that kind of as a safety meeting combined with SSPCs and our action plan that we put together. I don't know if, well, you know, you can't see that, but I'll send those things to y'all also. And what we did.
Do me a quick favor. See if you can try to share your screen now. I think I fixed it for you.
Okay, well, you're all right, Nicole. I don't care what Anton was saying a while ago. Can y'all see my screen?
She doesn't either, Larry.
I know. But can y'all see it?
Yeah.
All right, let me, this won't take but a minute. It's real short and sweet. Of course, I'm in the wrong folder. Give me just a second, y'all.
Barry, I believe there's a file management class on the LMS somewhere. that you
Yeah, I
might-
know, I gotta have that. All right, right here. Yeah, I definitely need that. I won't argue with you at all. But here it is. All right, so this is my little presentation on our COVID-19 reopening process for the C7. And basically, to me, it was all about mitigating the anxiety and the hazards and the concerns of everybody, SSPC, our staff, the iFTI, the instructors, contractors, proctors, and all the members. We had our new health and safety officer, Lisa Brooks, screening people as they came in. She screened herself, us, meaning the staff, the proctors, instructors, operators, and all of the members. We had to sign off on a questionnaire. She did the questionnaire and took everybody's temperature. They donned a glove and then signed it. And then they also received the IUPAT finishing trades training procedure and the SSPC participant procedures. And, you know, they initialed everything, signed it, and we turned all the documents into SSPC, the contractor, and the iFTI. And basically, we followed the hierarchy. We eliminated all the hazards that we could. We put administrative controls, engineering controls in place, and where we couldn't mitigate hazards, we, you know, used PPE. But we did stuff like, you know, for lunch, we had small pizzas. They go right in the box out of the oven, and they took them to their car. You know, we allowed 4 in our break room. We have 6 tables in our break room. We only allowed 2 in the restrooms at one time. We only allowed, like, you know, they were talking about donuts earlier. We allowed snacks that were individually wrapped. And that was PPG, by the way. Don't they know we're boycotting them? But and coffee was Keurig's only, and they had to have gloves. And I think somebody mentioned, no, Larry, we didn't do the gloves things. We did hand sanitizer. But either way, the screener was right there with the coffee pot. So that's how we handled coffee. So we had a screener. You know, documentation was the key. Screener staff, proctor, operators, members, everybody signed off on everything. These are all the documents. And then the screener, of course, did a safety meeting that everybody signed, and she used the Core 195 along with Glenn Wilson's slide that you see behind him. He made his own little COVID slide, because that's Glenn. And he's retiring in October, by the way. So any of y'all that know Glenn, give him a shout out, tell him how much you love him. And I'm sure he'll be around to proctor. But, and you know, all parties received a copy. I can't stress that enough. But basically, how we handled the whole thing and came up with our plan was taking the guidance from our leadership, you know, and listening to everybody's concerns, especially SSPC. You know, there you have it. There's a third party. We had to be concerned about them. We had to be concerned about our international and our members. So that's how we handled that. And we're basically doing what everybody else is doing. And peace, love, and happiness, and sanitize. And that's what I've got.
Very good, Larry. It looks like you, it was well thought out, and I like the presentations. That was good, especially the last slide. That was fantastic.
But it was just a team effort, you know, everybody from Nicole to Dan to Mike and Eric putting together stuff, and Marty, McNulty, and just everybody. And we didn't leave anything unturned. We made it our own, and we put the plan in action. And I think that's what everybody's doing. You know, we're using everything that y'all are putting out there, and we really appreciate, you know, the international.
Well, like I've said a couple of times, Larry, we're definitely all in this together, and you know, we can learn a lot from one another. We can help each other. I appreciate you sharing with us and showing us what you did. So I'm going to do a couple things real quick. I'm going to introduce the speakers that we have on the line today. Well, actually, we've got Bernie primarily is going to be answering your questions, but we've got a couple other folks I'll introduce in case Bernie calls on them for some support. Before we get to that, Nicole, can you put the poll on the screen? So these were the results of the poll that we took, so you can see where we're at. 3% not ready. Nobody picked 25%. 26% of you were 50% ready. 75% was 55% of you are 75% ready, and 16% of you are 100% ready. So that's basically where we're at. So it looks like, you know, we still got a couple of people that are unsure and don't feel comfortable. Everyone else is, you know, 50, 75%. A few of you are up at 100%. I think that 50 to 75% is probably going to be the sweet spot, just because there's still so much we don't know about this virus. We think we know a lot about it, and we've got a lot of it figured out, but there's still a lot that we don't know, and we're learning more every day. So, you know, those are interesting results. We'll see how those match up a little bit later. So we've got a couple of people on the phone. You all know Bernie. You have heard from him several times. Some of you have spoken directly with him. Bernie's going to go through and start answering some of the questions that you guys brought up. We'll spend a little bit of time doing that. And then after we get done going through some of those questions, if we have follow-ups or people have other questions, you know, we'll definitely handle those as well. Again, please, if you have follow-ups, you can ask them directly, but also type them into the group chat, so that way we can keep track of them. And anything that we don't answer, we'll make sure and get back to you in a document. We've got a couple of attorneys on the phone just in case Bernie needs any assistance as it pertains to potential legal questions or legal issues. Again, I'll say this multiple times probably throughout this. You need to talk to your home local counsel. The advice that we're giving here is not legal advice. This is just our recommendations. This is some of our best practices, some of the things that we've thought through. You need to talk to your local counsel, make sure that they're comfortable with what you guys are doing. And, you know, feel free to say, hey, I was on an FTI webinar and this is what they talked about, but you need the advice of your local counsel. So we've got Marty Mills and Warren Borish are our counsel for FTI, LMCI, and LMP. And we also have Joe Kolick online, who's in-house counsel for the union. So if we have any legal issues that you know, Bernie doesn't feel comfortable answering or anything like that, we might flip it to one of the attorneys. And you know, we'll try to stay health and safety related. But if you guys have other questions, you know, you can ask them. We might not be able to get to them today, but you can ask them, and we'll see what we can't do to get those answered. So I'll turn it over to Bernie now. Bernie, go ahead and you can take us through some of the questions. I think we're going to pull them up on screen, and Bernie's going to talk through them. And again, you have follow-ups, you have other questions, other things you want to know about, please put it in the chat box. I'm going to go on mute, and Bernie, take it away. And I'm still going to be here, so I might jump in from time to time.
Sounds good. Yeah, feel free. I mean, because again, this is, you know, something that we're all in this together. So they just, there's a photo of me up there. I'm the person on the left, if in case you might not know. There's a couple of my kids there. This is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about practicing industrial hygiene, because at some point these guys are going to have to get out there and work as well. And I want to make sure that they can come home with, you know, a healthy set of lungs, all their fingers, and hopefully a little bit more money in their pocket. So we all have to work, and we have a right to do so safely. With that said, we're going to get into a number of questions. Donna was able to take the questions that were sent in. She arranged them and compiled them into some groups and put them on a slide here. I actually went through and I typed stuff up. A lot of these things I could answer right off the top of my head, but sometimes I wanted to make sure that I was putting in pertinent references or citations, because, practicing industrial hygiene or health and safety, I don't get a second chance. People who are doing this don't get a second chance at some stuff in some cases. So we want to make sure that the information is right. With that said, a lot of this really is geared towards indoor work, right? Your training centers. Now, I did have some questions that were submitted that were more towards a construction site work environment, and we, answered those as well. But to get into, the first sort of batch of questions, we do have to understand now, Anton said this, there's a lot about the virus that we don't know, but we're starting to get a good idea on some things that are very important for us moving forward, not just in our work, but as a society. And one of those things is how this transmits. So it's airborne transmissible. We know that this virus can be infective or active and carried in small aerosols. Not just that we sneeze or cough out, but literally we could be talking, breathing, laughing. That's going to generate particles that will carry the virus, that are going to be able to spread around the air at far distances and be able to reach people and expose them. Now, obviously, if you're coughing or sneezing, these things are going to go farther. We've got research showing if you sneeze, the stuff can go all the way up to 30 feet. We also have documentation now that the virus can stay floating in air and infective for 12 to 16 hours. So if you got somebody who is, indoors, they're sick, they're coughing, they're laughing, talking, they're in there for a while, they're going to be spreading the virus around. It's going to stay in the air for a while. Now, why is this important? Well, if we're indoors, there's a formula that we can apply. And it's not exact. I can't give you a quantity on this, but this is how it goes. If you're indoors, your risk goes up. If you're around a lot of people indoors, your risk is going to go up more. If you stay indoors for a while, your risk is going to go up further. And if you don't have good ventilation system, the risk keeps going up, okay? So we have indoor work, plus the time that you're going to stay there, plus the amount of people that are there, plus ventilation. And I shouldn't just say work. One of my favorite things to do is go to a movie theater. I ain't doing that for a while. That's a great example, especially on opening night of one of the new Star Wars movies or something. So I'm indoors for 2 hours, 30 minutes, maybe 3. I'm in a packed movie theater. It's doubtful that that ventilation system is working to design and spec. And that's, covers all those risk factors right there. So I'd be at an increased risk. So with the training center, I've heard some discussion already at some ways that you're sort of minimizing what I'm talking about. I heard of staggering classes, reducing class sizes. These are all really good things. The thing that I didn't hear much talk about, though, is ventilation. Now, a few people did ask questions about that, and I'm going to get into it. But I need to be very clear. Ventilation is going to be very important if we want to try to resume some normalcy indoors. So if you happen to have, a construction job and you're outside, that's great. If you're indoors in a training center, or if you happen to be, recoding a nice hotel or something like that, and it's also open for business, your risk is going up. So you have to look at it. If you're working indoors, if you're around a lot of people, if you're staying in there for a while, you look at the ventilation system, you can kind of get an idea of what level of risk you're going to be at. And I'll give an example. One of the first things that a lot of essential, stores did, like grocery stores and things like that, is what do? They shrunk their hours of operation. So they went from opening at 7 a.m., closing at 8 or 10 p.m. to only, now closing at 3, 4, 5 o'clock. Well, all that does is it concentrates the amount of people who want to go and buy milk, right? Or in my case, beer. So that's not a good idea. So, things that you can consider, like staggering your training sessions, opening up the training center longer. Maybe you have a second shift, education program for a little while, where you've got some classes in the day, you've got some that might end at 10 at night or something, and you mix those up with online trainings. There's a bunch of ways that we can attack the factors of that equation. I said, being indoors, being around people, staying in there for a length of time, and then ventilation. And look, I don't know why, but 95% of scientists say that this is airborne transmissible. For whatever reason, it doesn't appear that many of them are vocally working at the CDC at this point. I don't know why. They still continue to say it's, you know, major droplet, you know, precautions, stay 6 feet. I don't get it. I don't know why. But if I look at all of my professional organizations, the literal hundreds of studies that I've been reviewing, you know, over the past couple of weeks, everybody's saying it. You know, we've got enough information to know this is airborne transmissible. And if we want to have some normal life, we have to acknowledge that and then plan for it. So with that said, let's get into some of these questions. And thank you for them. It was really beneficial for me to have some of this stuff up front. Like I said, I could, you know, off the top of my head, get through a few of these without a problem, but I wanted to be able to get some more cited information. And I think Anton might have mentioned it at the beginning. I am going to post answers to the ones, actually I'm going to post answers to all of them, you know, by the end of the week, Friday, especially the things that I might not, you know, get to here. And I don't want to sort of cut anybody off. So if I answer a question and that says, okay, well, geez, good, but what about this? You know, feel free to buzz in and just ask that. And folks are going to help me kind of manage the time so that I can move along. But the intent is to answer these questions to a point where you can now take some action or have some level of comfort. So we got number one, is there a specific product you would recommend for disinfecting our training centers? And then what are the most effective, readily available household cleaners to disinfect our classrooms and facilities? So basically you want to look at the EPA N list for SARS-CoV-2 or for COVID. You can just type that in, EPA N list in Google. You'll be able to get access to it on the EPA website. They have in a format where you can either download the PDF and you can type in a product that you want to use. And if it's there, it'll bring it up. Now, you might not be able to find it because they might be using a commercial name or they might be using an ingredient. For instance, to answer number two, I use Pine Sol, that wonderful fresh scent of the forest that I grew up with. It's not on that EPA list because the active ingredient is glycolic acid. So if I look, you grew up with Pine Sol too, Anton? So if I look on my ingredient list for Pine Sol, right? And this is something fun that you can have your kids do if you want to include them. So you look at the ingredients list. I see the active ingredient glycolic acid. I type that into my EPA list search, and it comes up. So that's what I would do. Make sure that it is on that list. And if you don't find it, don't give up. Go to your ingredient list on your container and look that up and see if it's there. All right, so if there's any comments or questions, we'll move on to the next one because a lot of these kind of relate to the same stuff. How often should door handles and other actively touched surfaces be wiped down each day? So this is a good question, and there's no straight answer on this. It really depends how many people you've got touching those surfaces. So I already heard, you know, some of your plans were to reduce the amount of people in your building. Obviously, you can do, you know, less cleaning. You know, after breaks and things like that, it might not be a bad idea to go and do the high touch areas for bathrooms or break rooms, things like that. So that really depends, but whatever you decide to do, right? And again, this might change a little bit from when you start to ramp up and to get more students back. But whatever you decide to do, you should have that written down in your plan. Now, I did hear one good thing is that I think everybody who spoke about their opening plans, they're all in writing, and that really needs to be done, okay? You want to have that in writing. That's your documentation that you're doing your due diligence, and that does impact your liability, you know? And I'm sure the attorneys will get into this a little bit when some of those questions come up because I will certainly need their help. But if you're operating in a fashion that's supposed to reduce risk to your students and protect your staff and students, but you don't have a written plan, you're just going off, you know, the seat of your pants, and somebody gets sick and somebody, you know, comes back at you, what are you going to do? You know, you don't have anything to show them. Well, no, I've been doing this. Well, how can you prove it? That's just what we do. You want to have everything written down in the plan. And it also helps you to improve. I think Anton said something about the phrase, you know, ready for the future, or, you know, being able to meet what's the demands of the future are going to be. This plan is going to be a living document. It's going to change as things come out. With that said, number 4, I should say, yeah, let's get into question 4. What's the best method for effective work area and tool disinfection? This is a great one because it leads into the issue of those electrostatic sprayers and some of the high volume sprayers that I know some locals have been looking at getting into using. So basically what you need to do is follow the delivery method that is on the label that the manufacturer recommends. That's the only way that you can be in compliance with FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So these things are basically pesticides, and under the law, you got to make sure that you are dispersing them and applying them in accordance with the manufacturer's labels. In most cases, you're going to be basically just using some kind of a mixture of the solution, and you're going to be applying it by hand with a mop, a sponge, you know, a cloth, something like that, and rubbing, letting it stay wet, and then air drying. Contact time is important, and with most of them, they're looking at trying to maintain a contact time of 10 minutes, which is about the time it would take, say, for a mopped floor to go from looking wet to being dry and being able to walk on it. So that's about all we have to say with that. But onto the sprayer issue. You've got to make sure that the sprayers are approved for use first by the manufacturer to put that material down, and second, that they're, you know, approved by the EPA and or the CDC. It's important to see what that guidance is out of those agencies. And some of the issue with that is it's one thing, you know, to be able to take a sponge and slather on, you know, a lot of that material. You're dousing that thing with liquid, right? Liquid disinfectant. You know you're getting it wet. But if I'm generating an aerosol and I'm dispersing that in the environment, there's a question on how much I need to disperse in that environment to make sure that I'm going to actively meet the contact time and the contact concentration that's going to effectively kill what I'm trying to kill. And that's going to change based on your room size and also the amount of stuff that you've got in your room that you're trying to disinfect. For instance, imagine going into a classroom, okay, with maybe, you know, 25 student desks and chairs, and you got your teacher desk and chair, and they've got some bookshelves and things like that. Well, how much of your disinfectant liquid do you have to spray in there and fog up, right? Compared to going into a teacher's break room with 1 table and 10 chairs and a refrigerator and some counter space. How are you going to determine that? And right now, you know, there's no real method to do that other than some sophisticated calculations, which, you know, we can't expect anybody to do going room to room. With that said, if anybody has any comments or questions about that, we'll jump into the next set of questions, which would be number 5, I think.
Bernie, we do have a question. Hold, please.
Okay. Yeah, please. What is it? Let's see. In my chat?
Yeah, so sorry. In the chat, there's a question about the CDC. Has the CDC approved any disinfectant for COVID-19?
So the CDC doesn't approve disinfectants or disapprove them. They basically push that off to the EPA. So they're looking at the EPA to list disinfectants on their end list.
And the recommended cleaners, they do need to be disinfectants, correct?
Yeah, so disinfectants is kind of a generic term. You know, anything that's listed on that EPA end list is going to qualify for use as long as you're applying it in the method in accordance with the label.
Okay, and then if anybody wants to reference the chat, we do have a couple of different links in there to that end list.
Thank
and
you.
I think we're good on questions unless anybody has anything live right now.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicole. That's helpful. All right, just got to get the slides back up. Here we go. All right, let's see. I've got, given that we have not been able to transition 100% from paper forms, et cetera, in training classrooms, can UV or other means be utilized to disinfect paper and other methods that could be taken to reduce the possible spread of the virus? So this is a very good question. Yes, UV light can be used, and that's being considered right now and studied about not just the effectiveness, but the safety of doing it. So what's like the minimum intensity or energy that of the UV spectrum that we can use where it's not going to damage maybe skin or eye, things like that. I don't know what the results of those studies are right now because I think they are in process. But you know, if you're not going to be hitting you know, your face and your body, things like that with UV light, and you're just talking about papers and objects in a class, that's different. But once you introduce people in there, that becomes, you know, another case entirely. As far as being able to transfer, you know, the virus with contact time, there's a number of things that you can do, and I've already heard mention of some of it. You limit the amount of papers used. You maybe ask somebody to put a glove on, you know, if they're going to fill something out, or you just have them use their own, you know, pen or pencil, something like that. You could also transition into, you know, electronic forms if you can, but if you're stuck with the paper stuff, again, if somebody has a glove on, you know, especially if they've just cleaned their hands, if they're trying to be mindful of not touching their face, which I've already done, I think 20 or 5 times or so since we started this, at least, you know, human behavior, there you go. You know, that's going to reduce the risk. So the risk of transfer is going to be lower in general than, you know, risk of airborne infection. But I've said this a number of times, you know, when we've had discussions about COVID-19, there's a bunch of tools out there that we're going to try to do to reduce the risk to catching this to this extent that you're going to make workers feel comfortable, you know, staff feel comfortable, students feel comfortable. So it might not be that you need to worry too much about contracting it if you're only asking folks to fill in 1 or 2 paper forms a week. If you're asking them to do a lot more than that, if you're asking them to share books, things like that, then your risk starts to go up. So then you got to consider what to do to cut back on that. So to kind of circle back and discuss the UV, right now, you know, I'm not aware of anything that's recommended for handheld use. You know, when people are present, they do have robots and things like that that they've been using in hospital and healthcare settings. When there's nobody left in the room, robot goes in and zaps it basically with UV light, but that doesn't get everywhere. You know, there are nooks and crannies. So UV light is directional. So if you have something blocking the path to the UV light from the surface you want to disinfect with the UV, it's not going to happen. So those are some things to consider as well. So right now, I would try to focus on minimizing the amount of paper material that you do need to use. And again, if you have to have people, you know, touch it and hand something in, you know, just say, hey, and you're going to put this in a policy, right? This will be part of your COVID plan. Wash your hands first, then come back and let's go ahead and fill this out, you know, or, you know, maybe use hand sanitizer, then go ahead and fill this out. And try to be mindful of not touching your face until this is done, right? Things like that. So that's where I would lean to on that question. All right, yes. Nicole?
Bernie, this is Alice. We're going to interchange. We do have a question from Dan Pensky Jr. Can any alternatives like vinegar or salt solutions or diluted alcohol be used in lieu of cleaners or disinfectants?
So you can actually put that in the end list and it'll let you know. So vinegar is acetic acid. So, you know, if acetic acid is listed on the end list, you should be good to go. Right. So basically what you want to look at is what an active ingredient is. Because again, you know, pine sol is not listed, but glycolic acid is. You know, bleach, sodium hydroxide, which is, you know, part of bleach, that is listed. They might actually list Clorox bleach on there. I'm not sure. But so anything that you want to use, put in that end list.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. In fact, Dan, if you want some homework, put in vinegar, acetic acid in the list and let me know what you come up with. We're all in this together. That would be good to know. All right, good question. All right, anything else or should we move on?
There's one more actually that just popped up.
Okay.
Does everyone need to sign a form that they received the written policy? And should there be a log every time they are back at training center, or would regular sign-in sheets work?
So good question. So, there's no legal requirement to do this now. However, legal and policy, sometimes they're taken one for other, but they're not the same. But it's always good to acknowledge that you have done your due diligence in promoting and training anybody, whether it's a student or, a worker on a policy. And so, you make sure that you give them that education on the policy, you give them the time to review it, and then have them sign off that they not just reviewed it, but they understand it. Because again, as trainers, right, just because somebody can read something doesn't mean they comprehend it. So you really want to make sure that they understand what's being asked of them and why. I've already heard a couple of good examples of some trainings that were given to students coming back, and they took it seriously. Because again, this isn't just an issue of one person going up on a ladder and worrying about their fall hazard, right? This is the potential of one person to infect many, which we know is happening with COVID-19. It's a good question. So yes, I would give the training on the policy, and I would have them sign off that they've got that and that they understand it. Yes, next question. No? All right, ready to go here. Let's see. I have got, will the virus spread through HVAC systems? And if so, what precautions do you recommend? This is a really good one. And again, I said it at the intro, we're going to really need to rely on our HVAC system. We should have been already, but unfortunately, that's typically not the case. And it's really unearthing this pandemic, some of the things that we should have been doing all along. Oh, which reminds me, one counterpoint to what I was saying about the disinfectants. It's part of HAZCOM. So, if we're asking workers to implement use of these disinfectants, they might not be, used to doing this, or they might be asked to disinfect and clean now on a much greater level than before, which could increase their hazard to these chemicals. Because look, these things are pesticides, okay? They do have some level of toxicity, some more than others. So it's really important that when you're asking people to use these chemicals at a greater rate, or if you're getting new ones in for people to use, make sure you're covering, them under the HAZCOM standard and giving them training on the new chemicals, making sure you've got a safety data sheet, and making sure they got the right PPE to reduce their exposure to using this stuff. Okay, so that's going back to the HVAC systems. So yeah, the virus could potentially spread, through the system, because what's the purpose of the HVAC? You're going to move air from one place to another. With that said, that's why it's important to make sure that you're not just recirculating your air without, cleaning it through filters. And ASHRAE is currently recommending MERV 13 or higher filters. And they're also recommending that you put in as much fresh air, outdoor air, as possible, as you can. Now, with that said, and I might run into some of the other systems here, the questions. Right now, there's no documented instances, including what they've been looking at in hospital settings, that I'm aware of, that show transfer and infection of one room and infecting somebody that was in another room through the HVAC system. Now, that's different than having transfer just in the general ambient air, like from open doorways into hallways into the next room, etc. But I'm specifically talking about if you've got somebody sick, or if you've got airborne virus, if your ventilation system picks that up and brings it somewhere else, can somebody else get infected? It's potential, it's theoretical, but we just haven't documented that yet. And with that said, other precautions that we can do to make sure that our ventilation system is going to help us out to its fullest extent, make sure it's operating to its designed specification. When's the last time you've actually had an HVAC assessment done for your facility, right? So you want to make sure that every room is getting the required number of CFMs, right, per that area, designated from, I think it's ASHRA 62.1. The current standard is 2019. So you're going to have different requirements depending upon if it's a classroom with seats, if it's a stationary classroom that's like an amphitheater type. Do you have an open air environment where you're doing, hands-on training? Is it an office room? Is it a cafeteria? Is it a kitchen? So all these areas have different requirements for cubic feet per minute, depending upon the amount of occupancy that's in there. And they also have some general standards, which I can get into in a minute. But you want to make sure that your ventilation system is working as designed to start. You want to make sure that it's cleaned because look, there's the issue of getting sick and having symptoms of COVID-19, but there's also this whole other issue of indoor air quality, which has been with us, which we know promotes a lot of issues for folks who are spending most of their working life indoors, right? So indoor air quality issues are significant as well. So we don't want to conflate these. We don't want to have an indoor air quality issue because you've got, a smelly carpet or a HVAC system that's not supplying enough fresh air and you have carbon dioxide buildup. We don't want that to be confused with COVID-19 symptoms, right? So if we're controlling the indoor air quality issues, logic says what's left is, we might need to be able to take a harder look at if a student or a worker has COVID-19 because we've sort of taken care of the other issues. So indoor air quality is really important. Additional methods, actually there was just another paper that came out about using upper air UV light. So this is a system where you take a UV light distribution system, you put it up towards the ceiling so that it's not going to hit anybody, right? It's up too high. And it's going to blanket the ceiling area. And when the natural heat and currents take our breath, our laughs, etc., and it's going to bring it up towards the ceiling, it's going to zap that air and inactivate the virus there. This has been used since the 1950s. It's even been used in school systems. It's also used heavily in healthcare settings, to make sure that as much viral and pathogen load is inactivated. You can also put UV light in the ductwork itself. And that has a couple of issues because, you've got to make sure that your maintenance is more up to par, et cetera. So that's some additional things that you can do. Ozone introduction also might be a possibility that you can look at using. And the place you want to go to get definitive answers for this is, through ASHRA. So they're the experts on this. The American Industrial Hygiene Association also have guidance, but they're going to point you right back to ASHRA because they're the professional system that governs, indoor air quality and designing your HVAC system. But, in the future, if you're looking at something, if you don't have your question answered, I'd be happy to, to help you out and at least point you in the right direction. The next question I got, Bernie's talked about the necessity to maintain cleaning HVAC systems in our training centers. Has there been any progress on a plan for that so that we may insert it into apply our work plans? So again, an HVAC system needs to be continuously maintained and in good conditioning and operating in the design spec. I can't tell you the number of times I've done an indoor air quality investigation the last 5 years. And one of my first things is to look at the HVAC system because they're responsible for 50 to 70% of all indoor air quality issues. It's just not working right or it's not cleaned. And the first thing I'll do is ask for maintenance records. And people say, well, what are those? We don't have those. We got an HVAC system, but we don't have anybody that maintains it. What do you mean? So it's really important that you're maintaining a log of HVAC. And ASHRA has, requirements underneath their standard for what you should be looking at for maintenance and how often, whether it's, weekly, monthly, biannually, or annually. with that said, if you've had a building that's been shut down for a while, you want to make sure that, you know, the building systems itself are ready to accept people back in, because these are things that are designed to be operating with people in them. And if you shut it down, it might be developing some things that you might not like. Let's say mold, right, in an HVAC system, because all of a sudden you're not bringing in fresh air, so your you know, sludge and drip pans aren't evaporating anymore, so it's going to start to collect some mold, right? Or maybe you've got, you know, your water that's building up sludge and slime because it's been inactivated and not used, you know, for 5 days. Maybe you don't have the temperature up high enough, so Legionella starts to become an issue. So the American Industrial Hygiene Association has put out guidance on how to make sure you're getting your building ready to accept people back into it. And we can get you access to that as well. Let's see, next question. Let's see. HVAC systems, spreading of the virus through HVAC systems, is there data available? What measures might be undertaken to mitigate the hazard, i.e. special filtration, UV, et cetera? So I answered some of this already. So to date, again, there's not been much in the literature speaking to COVID-19 transmission through HVAC systems or even contamination of the system itself. Again, it's possible, but you know, it's going to be, again, of great importance for taking out one of those risk factors of that equation: being indoors, being around people, spending time indoors. So what does your ventilation system look like? I can't state this strongly enough. Really look at your HVAC systems. Make sure they're operating, at least right now, to the specification that you designed them for, and then look at improving them. If we're going to want to go back to normal, and if COVID-19 does not go away, or if we're, you know, waiting for a vaccine, or maybe if a vaccine is going to help, but it's not necessarily going to do everything we need it to. In other words, you know, keep our classrooms stocked or keep our work sites stocked with people who are not sick. It might not be a bad idea to invest in some additional upgrades. Like, you know, you might need to get a better blower to move more air through filters if you need to upgrade your filter system. You know, looking at UV systems or ozone systems. These are things that you should consider to do, but you got to start by seeing what you've got. Question? Somebody? I saw that our PowerPoint went down. Is there a question?
We just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to digest that about the HVAC. And if you had any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like and ask away. Otherwise, we'll go back to the slideshow.
Hey, Bernie, Brian Gingrau here.
Hi there.
I was just on a conference call or a webinar the other day, actually, with a outfit here in Ontario named Pinchin, but basically they're the organization or the company that the Ontario government uses here for asbestos, lead, and mold, that sort of thing. So they are kind of the go-to people here in the province of Ontario for this kind of stuff. Anyways, it was kind of interesting. They talked about something as simple as changing your filter efficiency and upgrading it to a higher efficiency. So I was wondering if maybe you could speak to that a little bit, seeing as there's, I know they use all these acronyms, and I'm not up on all the acronyms for, you know, the different types of filters, but maybe you could speak to that. That might be a simple solution somewhat to some of our HVAC systems. I know here in our facility here, we have multiple roof units feeding all different parts of our facility here. So it's not like we're just talking about one system. We probably got 5 or 6 up on the roof that we would have to deal with. And actually they're owned by the landlord. We're just a tenant here. So anyways, hopefully you can just speak to that.
Yeah, so they're designated. It's a little different than like what we use for you know, cleaning air for respirators. We use HEPA filter, high efficiency particulate air, but this is MERV, and I forgot the acronym, so I looked it up. Minimum efficiency reporting value. So basically, it's, you know, how efficient these filters are going to be down to a certain micron diameter for, you know, for the aerosols and the stuff that's floating around the air. So ASHRAE recommends going as high as you can, but they say minimum 13. And when you go up, what you're doing is you're going to be creating a more tight barrier for your fan to have to pull air. And so that might start to wear, the fan down. So depending upon what kind of fan you have, you might need to increase its horsepower, change your fan out. If you want to upgrade the filters. The higher you go, the better fan, I should say, the more powerful fan you might need to have. But that can be evaluated, by a professional engineer. You want to make sure that you have somebody who's qualified, look at the system. Because again, this is something like, imagine if you're connected. Somebody asked a fall protection question, so this is good. Imagine if you're connected to your fall protection harness, right? Your fall arrest system, and you're up on a girder. The only thing protecting you from death of falling, besides hitting the ground, right, is that fall protection harness. You've got to have faith that that thing was created to specification, and that it was inspected and it's good for use. So, when you're looking at your HVAC systems, you really want to make sure that you're confident that whatever it was you did is, in line with what professional engineers would agree with for your system. And then that you maintain it in that. And so that way there you can walk around confident in your building, that thing is going to be operating to a certain level that's going to be reducing your risk to getting COVID-19 and other stuff. I mean, if you've got a better ventilation system to begin with, you're going to, have happier building occupants, and you're actually going to be seeing less, sick time, because we know that indoor air quality leads to a large bulk of sicknesses, that people are going to experience in work, in office settings and indoor settings, things like that. So yeah, so I would look at minimum upgrade to a MERV 13 or higher. And if you want to go to ASHRAE's website, and I've listed that in the responses to the questions, so you can go back and look at these. They have a whole COVID-19 support page that you can freely access. But if you want to get down to the nuts and bolts of what they're requesting that you do or recommending that you do, that's under their 62.1 standard of 2019. Unfortunately, you have to purchase that. We do have a copy at the iFTI, that can be shared as part of the group. So, if you want to ask questions about it, things like that, but you want to go to that document. Are we good? How's that sound? Yeah.
Hey, Bernie,
Yeah.
if I could, I put this in the chat too, but just to make sure that everybody's clear, don't just put a high efficiency filter in your system. Make sure that it's looked at by somebody first to ensure that it can actually handle it. Even in your house, if you put too high an efficiency filter in and the system's not designed for it, you can blow it up. So yeah. I know that's the technical term, but that's what they have. Don't ruin your HVAC system because you just put a higher grade filter in there, and doubling up your filters does not work. There's all kinds of gimmicks out there. Get a professional and have a professional look at it and make real recommendations.
Yeah. No, that's well said, Anton. And unfortunately, people want to make money on stuff when there's an opportunity. I can't tell you the number of times that I was called in because a mold abatement company, came in and did something, and they didn't have the professional fortitude to understand what it was they needed to do. Sometimes I would ask, when I was actually giving counsel for a client with a mold abatement company, look, can I talk to your microbiologist, your industrial hygienist? So we don't have one of those. Well, how are you giving, professional guidance on mold and bacteria and all this other stuff when that's not part of your background? Oh, we have these EPA fact sheets. Oh boy, that kind of stuff makes me nervous. So find somebody who's a professional, at least to start you off and get you down the right path, right? Because you don't want to buy a gimmick, or you don't want to buy something that, one, is going to hurt your system, but two, you think is going to protect you. And all of a sudden, you've got 50% of your occupants sick with COVID-19. right? So it's important. All right, so I guess if there's no other questions, let's move on. Let's see. Here we go. Let's see. If a training center makes it mandatory for wearing a mask, do we need to fit test them? This is a really good question. So, this is one that the attorneys might be able to jump in here at, but I just want to start off by saying, so first you have to define, are you asking for a staff member who works at the training center to put the mask on, or are you asking a student? And then are you asking them to put on an actual respirator or like an N95 or higher? Or are you asking them to put on a cloth face covering? Because these are a bunch of legal definitions that are going to help dictate, what the answer is. And before I turn it off to the attorneys, I just want to say, you want to look at, what the respiratory protection standard requires and as they define a respirator. So they will define a respirator as a tight fitting filtering face piece, which is an N95 or higher. So that could be, an N100. It could be a half face elastomeric respirator with cartridges and up. And if you are wearing a filtering face piece, right, so an N95 or higher, you have to first be medically cleared to make sure that it's not going to pose a stress on your body. And you have to be medically cleared before you're fit tested. Why? Well, I might put somebody in a respirator just for 10 minutes to fit test them. I don't know they have a heart condition, and all of a sudden, Bob or Jane collapses on the floor clutching their right arm or their left arm because they're having a heart attack. So before you put somebody in a respirator, you have to make sure that they're medically cleared to do so. And then secondly, before they go in an environment that they would be expected to wear that respirator because they need to protect themselves from something, they do have to be fit tested. But this circles me back to bringing the attorneys. Are they students? Are they staff, actual workers? Or what is your designation of face covering class? Is it just a face covering or an actual respirator? So if I could get some help here from some of the attorneys, that would be great.
Now this is Warren Borish. I assume I'm on. I think you have to go back to state guidelines. Most of the state reopening regulations are asking or requiring, in some cases, masks, but not respirators. So I think from the student perspective, masks are probably sufficient. And I don't know really whether that would, I think that might also apply to the staff as well. I don't think I've seen anything in Pennsylvania and New Jersey which would require respirators in our context. Marty, Joe?
I agree with that. All of the recommendations I have seen are just cloth face coverings. Obviously, even with that, you should take steps to make sure everyone is wearing it correctly, that it covers the entire face and nose, or the entire mouth and nose properly. But I haven't seen any more stringent requirements than that anywhere.
Okay, thanks, folks. So let me sort of circle back. This is yes.
If I could, I think, not just from the legal perspective, but just from a doing the right thing perspective, I think if we're making it mandatory that we put people in masks, we need to have a respiratory program in place. Even if it's just face coverings, we should at least talk about it. And if we're going to require that they wear them at the training center, I think we should be providing them. And by we, I mean that, whatever facility is doing that. While you might not be legally required to force them to do it, I think from a practical standpoint, keeping people safe, it might be a good practice. But regardless of that, if you require it, I think you should be providing it, and don't make people bring their own stuff or tie a T-shirt around their face. Right. And there are grants out there that are available to help put people in PPE and face coverings and all that. So while you might not be legally required to do it, it might just be a good best practice to follow.
And I would say as well, I mean, there could be the situation where somebody claims that They have some underlying condition that makes it difficult for them to work while wearing just a simple cloth face mask. That's a discussion you need to follow up on, because we have to keep in mind that we're trying here to keep the most possible people safe. I'm not saying you should necessarily exclude that person, but you're going to have to see what their limits are and make adjustments as you would for accommodating anybody with a disability.
Okay, so to continue this, because this is a really good question. So I know that we've, we broached the subject of the recommendations right now from the CDC are a cloth face covering. However, we know that's not sufficient to reduce your risk to a level that will, I mean, nothing's guaranteed, but that will reduce your risk to something where you can say, okay, I can go out and work around a bunch of people who are sick with COVID-19 and have a reduced risk of getting infected. And this goes into the issue of 95% of my colleagues and scientists who study this stuff and recommend it are saying one thing, and for some reason the CDC is still saying another thing. I'll remember back to when this all started, and the CDC said, don't wear, to the public, don't wear N95s out because it's not going to protect you against this virus. And by the way, we need to make sure that we have N95s to protect our healthcare workers from this virus. Wait a minute, which one? Come to find out, we didn't have enough in the stockpile, so the CDC came up with a different narrative to try to convince the public not to go and make a mad rush on N95s, which they did anyway. So if I were to run a site and I had to have people indoors and they had to be next to each other for any appreciable amount of time, or even if I was on a construction site where I had a number of people around, they had to work close to each other. And I'm not saying within 6 feet, I'm saying close to each other, maybe 12 feet, maybe 15 feet, because of how far this virus can be carried. I would require people on my site to wear an N95 respirator. Now, if that, remember, an employer can always go beyond the bare minimum, which is OSHA regulations, right? Our PELs, if we remember what our PELs are, the permissible exposure limits, those are bare minimums. An employer can always go beyond that. If they are going to do a best practice and go beyond the bare minimum, they still have to follow the different laws that might govern whatever it is you're trying to do. For instance, the respiratory protection standard. So if on my site, I'm going to require all workers to wear an N95, I have to make sure that I'm doing it in line with the respiratory protection standard, that I have a written program in place, that I'm giving them training on the program, that I'm getting them medically cleared, that I'm getting them fit tested, that they understand how to don and doff, care for, the equipment that I'm giving them. So that's really important. So this is a big loaded question. Although, again, the guidance by the CDC is, hey, wear face masks out and about when you're around people. 95% of industrial hygienists, aerosol scientists, et cetera, are saying, hey, a face mask is going to help reduce it, but it's really not what you need if we're expecting workers to be around each other. I'll give you this example, meatpacking industry. Cloth face mask ain't going to cut it. Those folks work so close together in such a densely populated environment. Those folks need to have, I would say, something higher than an N95, especially since they're in a humid environment. So we look at what level do we want to protect people to, and then we have to decide what's the obligation then, and this is a good one for the attorneys. If as an employer, I have to follow the respiratory protection standard, whether it's required that I put somebody in an N95, or I want to do it because I'm a good employer, a better employer. But what about a student? So this is a question that the iFTI has been kicking around for a number of weeks now. Well, what are students and what is our obligation? Are they employees of some kind? So let's look at it like this. What happens if the student came and climbed up on a ladder for a class and fell off and broke their leg? who's liable for them? So again, what is that student designated at when they are at your training center? And I would love to hear what the attorneys say about this one, because I've been scratching my head about this now for about 8 weeks.
So this is Warren again. If you think about it from the work comp analogy or from the injury on the job site analogy, we've wrestled with this for years. We've had work comp battles between the employer to which that apprentice was assigned. We've had battles with their insurance carrier and the training center's insurance carrier, because the training center obviously has work comp coverage for its trainers and for its employees. And we've resolved these things not happily, sometimes with a combination of everybody kicking into the pot to cover. We've also looked at the liability coverages for the training center, just straight up insurance coverages. There's unfortunately not a whole lot of real good answers to this, and we've agonized over this for years. I think that, again, while I agree completely that we should go above and beyond to protect not only staff but the students, the other questions come into play. From a liability perspective, I think, and Marty and I were talking about this kind of offline before we got to it, as long as the training center is meeting those minimal obligations, and if they go beyond them all to the good, the potential for any liability on the part of the training center is limited. Doesn't mean you can't be sued, but it means that it'd be probably very difficult for a lawsuit to be successful. But it is a very slippery slope. There aren't a lot of good answers out there. I agree that if you're going to go above and beyond, you got to be sensitive to whatever other requirements would kick in as a result of that additional protection. But I think, generally speaking, from our perspective as attempting to give you legal guidance, you want to make sure that you're aware of what all the state, federal requirements are, OSHA, CDC, and as long as you're meeting those obligations, you're probably okay in terms of liability.
I took notes.
It's crazy. That whole work comp thing has been an issue for years, and it's not an easy. There's no easy answers for that.
Yeah, and again, what does it look like then? Like, let's say if you're the iFTI main campus and you're getting trainers from other district councils in, or maybe you're a district council training center and you're hosting, a seminar or something like that, right? And you're having other district council trainers come in that aren't apprentices. Well, where do they fit, right? So these are questions that I think we do need to discuss and mull over. But if you are going to be requiring, an N95, you gotta, follow the respiratory standard, especially because you don't want to do any harm first. You don't want to put somebody in something that their body just can't handle.
Hey, Bernie, if I could add one thing to that, that's also where insurance comes into play. So talk to your insurance carriers. There are policies that protect apprentices when they're at your facility. Make sure, I believe in overinsurance. Even personally, I believe in umbrella policies and everything else. Insurance is one of those things I don't think you can have too much as long as you can afford it. There are policies out there that cover trainers and cover the facility if an apprentice is injured on site. I can put you in touch with our insurance company, our insurance agent, if you don't have somebody locally that you can speak with. But I would encourage you to look into that and get a local policy. There is a national insurance program that, there's one that's nationwide through UIG. That's the one that we participate in. I can share that information with you, but talk to your local agent. See what's available, and I'd encourage you to make sure that you have insurance while the apprentices are there to protect them. If you can fill as many of those gaps, in between, our main thing is let's keep our apprentices safe. Let's keep people that visit the facility safe. in the event that something does happen, let's try to limit our potential output of money, whether we're actually found liable or not. Insurance can help you get attorneys and, you know, fight those claims, not to the detriment of the person that was injured, but, you know, to protect the fund, protect the assets of the fund, while at the same time providing for some help and some assistance for that individual that got injured. So insurance is always something to keep in mind.
And just to go back to Bernie's point for a second about the hypothetical, it's not really hypothetical, the reality of trainers from around the country coming into iFTI, that their work comp coverage for their home council, their home training center, protects them as employees of the council who are engaged in their employment by participating in these training programs. So there are fallback situations, but Anton's absolutely right. And the district councils, our affiliates in the training center should look at their potential insurance coverages for all manner of these liabilities. I think it's worthwhile as well.
Excellent. Let's move into
Bernie?
number 10.
Bernie, if I could just interrupt for a second. It's about 3:48, so we only have a couple more minutes. Alex Beltran has a question. His hand was up, so I'd like to let him ask his question.
Okay.
And then we'll have a final poll before we move into the wrap up by Anton.
Okay.
Okay. So Alex, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. All right, I'll ask.
Hang on.
There he is. Okay, okay.
I had to re-sign back on. I'm double signing in. So my question is, can you contract it through your eyes?
Yeah, eyes are mucous membrane. Yep. So like if, you know, if somebody sneezed on a railing and you put your hand on that railing and then you wiped your eyes, you know, yep. Eyes are a good mode of transmission for contact.
So do we need to issue goggles versus safety glasses?
So it depends if your potential contact or viral load in the air is going to be very high. Eyes are less likely than, you know, mucous membranes of the nose and mouth by inhaling it. So I'll give you this for instance. If I was working in a healthcare setting or an ambulance driver or something like that, I would want goggles on. I would want to reduce the amount of somebody being able to cough at me accidentally, reduce the risk of me touching something that has infected material on it and then rubbing my face. So if you are in a high risk environment, I would say yes. If you were doing something, I know there was a question on first aid, CPR, something like that, yes, where if somebody was, you know, you want to assume that they were sick. And that's what, by the way, you know, paramedics and EMTs were starting to do. They had policies where they were going to assume everybody had COVID-19. So they were going to make sure that they protected themselves to that level. So unless you're in a high risk environment, Alex, I wouldn't worry about wearing goggles. I mean, if you did, it's going to reduce your risk. Okay. As far as how much, I can't tell you. I'd want to more likely protect your respiratory system, your nose and your mouth first.
Okay, thanks, Bernie.
So with that, Alice or Don or Nicole or whoever it is that's running the poll, if you could pull the poll back up. So similar to what we asked before, now that we've talked through this, how confident are you in reopening your training center or creating a COVID-19 plan with the current condition? So 0, 25, 50, 75, or 100. So basically, you know, how confident you feel in moving forward and opening your centers. And I will give you a couple of minutes to respond to that, or a couple of seconds to respond to that. And then we'll take a look at those results and the results that we had earlier.
And I got to apologize. I had 46 questions. I got through 9. I was naive. I'm like, I'm going to whip through these.
Bernie is somewhat long-winded, but we love him. He's very thorough and does a very thorough job, and this is an important topic. So, Bernie, I'm glad you took the time that you did, and you know, we can schedule more of these. We'll have the written document as well, but you know, the 2 hours sure went fast, didn't it?
Well, I can tell you there's some exciting reading for folks to do if they want to find the answers to their questions out. Because I did take the time to answer all these in writing, and I'll finalize that and get it out to the iFTI to post Friday.
Very good. Thank you, Bernie.
You're
And if anyone has additional questions that they didn't ask before that they would like to be included in that document, now if we get 100 of them, it's going to take us a little bit more than a couple of days, but feel free to send them in, and you know, we'll answer what we've already got. We'll get that posted, and then if there's any follow-ups, we'll get those answered in a timely manner and upload the current version of the document. So the poll is back up. It looks like we did a little bit better. You know, we got some good information here. It looks like our numbers did go up a little. I remember, I can't remember all of what they were, but I remember 100% was at 16% earlier. We're at 21, so we've made some improvement there. Nobody is 0% prepared, so you know, it sounds like at least a few of you got some good information in this, give you a little bit more confidence at opening your centers. You know, one of the most important things, I think, you know, we can talk for hours about all the different what ifs, the different scenarios, ask all these different questions, and Bernie can go on for hours explaining them and give you all, you know, great detail. But the important thing to remember is, number one, written plan. You have to have a plan. You know, if you act in a reasonable manner, you use the best information that you have available to you. You do your best to try to protect people. Number one, that's the right thing to do to keep people safe. But number two, that's probably the best way to limit your potential liability, is trying to do the right thing with the information that you have. If you know that something's going to hurt somebody, you can't put them in danger of, you know, exposure to that. So that's the importance of a written plan, is basically showing people that you've taken these things into consideration, that you've taken action, that you've put that on paper that other people can read and review. Speaking of reviews, you need to update the plans periodically. You should probably have a COVID reopening plan before you open up. Then you need to review that COVID plan as we move forward, and that should probably turn into an overall preparedness plan for any infectious disease. This virus could come back and make a resurgence. There could be a variation of it, or it could be a completely different virus. How we respond to this can help set us up for how we respond to things in the future. We're working on a plan here at FTI, and before we open up, actually the entire campus is working on a plan. Before we open up the buildings, we'll have that plan in place. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to have to be reviewed and updated periodically, probably more so immediately. And, you know, as we get a little bit further, learn a little bit more, those updates will probably be a little bit less frequent. But, you know, we'll have that plan in place, and we're recommending that you do the same thing. We don't want to get into a position where we tell you this is what your plan needs to look like, and we want to approve it before anybody opens a training center. That's not what we've tried to do here today. We want to give you information so that you can work with your professionals locally. We'll give you as much input as you want. We'll share, anybody that wants to share their plan, we'll share them with everybody else. We'll have a repository in that instructor lounge so that people can take a look at those and, you know, pull the best pieces from other people's plans. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions for Bernie. Get them to your ATR, send them in to FTI International. We'll get those to Bernie so that we can get some responses and share those with everybody. If you want more webinars like this, you know, we'll definitely put those together so that we can continue to collaborate and work through some of this stuff. You know, I'm thrilled that we were able to do this. I wish we had more time. I always wish we had more time because we could go on forever. And I really appreciate, I know how busy everyone is. I really appreciate you making time for us today, and, you know, and sharing this time with us and moving forward, trying to protect, you know, our staff, our members, you know, all the people that come in and visit our facilities. We've all said it a couple of times now, we're all in this together. There's a huge learning curve here. This is new for everybody, and the more we can collaborate, the more we can talk together and work on this together, the more likely we are to solve it. So, you know, I'll open it up for any questions. We only got a couple of minutes before we've got our hard stop. I'll open it up for any questions, but you know, if there's nobody with anything pressing, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you all. Thank you for what you do on a regular basis. Be safe out there. You know, look out for yourself, your family, your coworkers. You know, be safe, and we'll talk again really soon. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and you know, we'll have this up. I'll say early next week. I know Bernie's going to be working on it. Hopefully get it done by Friday, but we'll say early next week we'll get it posted. And until then, everybody take care of yourself. Thank you.
Hey, folks, thank you.
All right, buddy. Thank you. Be safe.